It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
This is Barnett Bain with my co-host Freeman Michaels here on Cutting Edge Consciousness and our special guest Jimmy Twyman. Before the break, Jimmy, you were about to tell us what you were going to do after the show, meeting up with Gene Houston.
Well, we're talking about jump time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but we gotta
we
gotta thread back and lay the trail.
Oh, sorry.
We're gonna meet up with Gene Houston, who famously speaks of jump time, because this is the time faced with all kinds of challenges that we leap, we jump, and then we look where we're leaping.
That's right. And, you know, Gene is so famous for talking about this and many other things. I mean, to me, Gene is one of the most brilliant people on this planet. And she recognized that evolution requires pressure. It doesn't, I mean, we were talking before about things that are cool, and, you know, we may think, well, wouldn't it be cool if evolution was easy? Well, really, it wouldn't be cool. Because when things are easy, we become complacent, and we become inert. We have to be motivated into that next step or that next level. And that's what Gene referred to as jump time. The idea that the pressure builds to the point that you just actually pop into that next level of consciousness or reality.
And there's a way of we've had, by the way, Gene on the show, and when she was on, we were talking about this idea of welcoming it, and even some level of, I don't know if the word is comfort in discomfort, but at least an acceptance. There's a certain amount
with uncertainty.
A friendship with uncertainty, exactly. And I think that piece is really important, at least in my own life. The idea that it's okay for me not to know, and that when things are seemingly coming apart, there's in that an opportunity, because that's what change is. Things have to come apart in order for something to be born. So,
Jimmy, you're very pregnant with possibility. You've been carrying
That's the first time he's ever been called pregnant.
I want to make sure that it's on his
Was
page.
that a Gene Houston book or something?
No, it wasn't. But it could be.
Sounds like one,
it certainly could be.
You know,
pregnant with what is yet unborn. That is a little more in the parlance of Barbara than Gene, but they are birds of a feather, certainly.
And I was an actor many years ago, and we would call it a pregnant pause. There was a pause that was pregnant with a possibility.
Well, we're in radio now, so there are no pauses on radio. There is no crying in baseball.
That's called dead air. We don't like that. That's when the station manager knocks, and it's like, what are you doing?
That's right. Too much dead air, we're dead air.
Yeah, that's right. We're off.
Yeah, so the party, that's going to be quite an event, and there's going to be quite an excitation and a neuronal exuberance generated there, to quote Gene.
Yeah, I'm looking so forward to being there, obviously, and but I think that it's just a symbol of this amazing time that we're in. You know, we're talking about journeys and caminos and walks, and really that's what we're all on right now. The life itself is a camino, and it's filled with challenges. And I love what you guys both said about welcoming it. And that's true in even the most dramatic of stressful situations. I remember about 6 years ago, I went through the most challenging situation of my life. I wrote a book called The Barn Dance about this. But my former wife, Linda, was murdered in Chicago right at the time when she was getting ready to move out to Oregon, and we were going to be together. And it was clearly a very traumatic experience for my daughter and everyone who loved her. And I can remember being in the grip of terror and grief, and more so than I've ever been in my life, and at the same time being profoundly grateful. Because I'm a human being, and because I'm awake, I'm alive, and I'm grieving, and I hurt, and this sucks, and I love it. Obviously I don't love what happened. That was, the most terrible situation I've ever been through. But what it was stirring within me, the growth that was occurring, and I think that's what you were referring to when you say to welcome it. The first thing that we feel drawn to do is to push it away.
Yeah, and I think it's the Dalai Lama who said pain is part of life, but suffering is optional. Suffering stems from the idea that what's happening oughtn't to be happening. Yeah. And the minute that we start to do that, that resistance causes tremendous suffering. But what you're talking about is the ability to, again, it's welcome it, because it's here, right?
Be the ocean and not the island.
Yeah, I think that's the key is, I mean, and that's it's so counterintuitive.
Right.
Because it certainly doesn't seem like the way to go, but I think anyone with experience and spiritual maturity knows that when I do that, number one, the healing is so much greater and quicker.
And it has a different quality to it. There is even in the deepest pain has a sorrow turns to a sweetness. There's a sweetness in it. There's a sweet sorrow
I agree
to
with
it.
that.
Yeah.
So there's a very, very different quality to that.
Yeah, it's bizarre, and but it's so true, and I think this is a very important discussion because so many of us want to gloss over it. I remember when Linda was killed, so many people would come to me and say things like,
"Help you numb."
Yeah, they would try to help me spiritual around it rather than go through it. They would say things like, "Well, she chose what happened to her, right?" And
this is the crazy kind of double talk of a particular kind of developmental spirituality that that pushes away from
the heavy lifting,
from being totally with what is and making expanding to contain it and to include it. But we hear, well, you created it all, so why did you create that?
Yeah, and it's just the silliest, most unhelpful thing that you could possibly say.
Very much so.
To someone in a situation, even if it's true. I mean, here's the thing: even if that is completely true, it still does not matter. I have to be human in this moment. I have to feel this. I have to go through this.
And of course, to the degree it's true that these things are they are so paradoxical.
Yeah.
And though we all are exploring deeply into our responsibility around the lives that we generate and create for ourselves and for each other, if I knew today what I know what I presume to know mentally that I created all, but if I really, really knew that, how might my life be different?
Yeah.
It's unlikely I would be physical doing this shadow play at all. Yeah. So it's very much about integrating a piece at a time, and those kinds of languaging, they're not often helpful.
Well,
if ever.
There's also this idea of skipping steps. Versus, really recognizing, as you're pointing out, it's a process, and grieving is a process, and honoring.
Very important one.
Really important.
So you have premature
transcendence syndrome. That's what we call PTS. That's our little phrase here on the show. PTS, premature transcendence syndrome. There's another piece too that you're bringing up, which I think is really important, having to do with being able to trust your feelings.
Yeah.
Look. And Barnett was alluding to this. We've all learned to numb out. We've all, and this is part and parcel of our culture today. I mean, I have some young kids, and I have an older son as well, and they're all prone to distraction because there's so many ways to distract oneself from being with feelings.
Yeah.
And trusting those feelings. And I often say, as a coach, I coach people that, don't trust your feelings until your feelings become trustworthy. Because a lot of our feelings, we were very quick to either evade them or to tie them around a story, right? To get attached to some, what we're speaking of, where there's this little story line that we can attach our feelings to, but it doesn't allow us to be in the rawness of them.
That's interesting. I like that.
And the work, too, the art that comes out of it, this book that came out of it, see, that comes out of an intimacy with the feeling experience. Because art is generated from the rawness of those feelings, not the canned, storyline of the feeling.
That's right. I mean, I can remember from the time I was a kid when I first started playing guitar and writing songs. It was when I would get a crush on a girl and then get my heart broken that I always wrote the best music.
That's so interesting, Jimmy, because
you're the only rock and roll person that's ever happened to.
Yeah, you're the first. What's so interesting is we had breakfast or a lunch a few weeks ago, and what strikes me so powerfully about you is that you are in full bore celebration full time.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you.
So it's an interesting. It's very much counter experience that you would migrate over to the melancholy. But I suspect it's not quite as melancholy, and it's more the sweet sorrow that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, that's right. Even when it does come up, because like everyone else, I'm a human being, and we feel things, hopefully. And when it does come up, when you wrap your arms around it and say, okay, here you are. Let's get to know one another here. That's when you integrate that shadow.
Let's get close. Let's get tender. But would you speak a little bit about how I'm interested in how much awareness goes behind the cultivation, the care and feeding of celebration that is so beautifully expressed through you?
Well, for me, it really is just being awake to the moment.
Mm.
It's funny because for really thousands of years, we have put such mystical sort of importance and distance on this idea that we call enlightenment or being awake. And usually we do so because we want it to be out there in the distance rather than intimate and close.
That's the PTS thing.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And the fact is, every time we look around us and realize who it is that's standing there and the opportunity that we have to love and to see and to feel, that's what enlightenment really means.
Mm.
And, I mean, the fact is we are filled with light. We just have to see that.
Yeah.
And every moment provides us with an opportunity, in particular through everyone that is sent to us to see. When I say the word see, I mean it with like a capital S. It's like, we can see someone with a small s, which is what the ego does, or we can see them, like an avatar, right?
Mm.
And when we really see someone, which means that we recognize who they are behind their masks, behind their wounds, behind everything, and we see the beloved, we see the Christ, we see the divine, however you want to express that, we see that in them. That's the first step, and the only step, really, to seeing it within ourselves.
That's fantastic. And you're seeing their essence. You're seeing the essential self.
I Jimmy you.
I Jimmy you. Oh, we got a new one around here. That's good. Now, there's a piece of this, too, I want to touch upon because, Barnett and I are prone to creative ventures. And I will say personally that it's my vulnerability that generates my creativity. And so for me, and this is what I'm hearing from you, so I understand that you, for a long time, going back to your teen years or maybe earlier, there was a relationship with this vulnerable part of this human part of you, which, again, in the teen years is so tricky because we want to be superhuman. We want to be these images of cool and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
So to be okay with the part of us that soft white underbelly, as it were, and allow that to come out in a creative outlet, energetically, that becomes sort of. I'm hooked on it. It sounds like you're hooked on it. You wrote 15 books and countless songs and made some movies, and it's a really great thing.
Yeah, but what have you done lately?
That's right. Come on, do something really impressive now.
I have realized, especially in the last few years, like when I'm writing a book or whatever, is that the more vulnerable I am,
that's it.
The more real I am, the more people get out of it. Like when
the more you get out of it.
I'm sorry?
And the more you get out of it.
Oh, absolutely. When I wrote The Barn Dance, number one, I wrote that because I had to.
Yes.
Because I was in grief. And I had an experience that I wanted to write about because I knew that it was that creative process that was going to bring me through it.
The book wrote you.
Exactly. That's a much better way of saying it. And then, of course, when I wrote the book, I was raw and real. And I remember my father read it before it went to the publisher, and he looked at me and said, "You can't publish this. I mean, there are parts."
No one in this family goes out without their clothes on.
That's
you
right.
don't look so good.
Oh, boy.
And I said, "I know, and that's why I had to write it."
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
It's not about me looking good. This is about me being real.
That's
And I have never had a book in my life that I've written that more people wrote to me and said, "I read this in one sitting," or "I read this in two sittings." I couldn't put it down because I saw myself in this book.
That's beautiful.
And that's what happens when we get that vulnerable and that raw. You know, the ego thinks that's weakness. That's really strength, and I think that's what we need to get.
Beautiful. And getting raw and real with you today has been an absolute pleasure for us and for our audience. Now,
And thank God and thank Jimmy that we brought it around to the circle ends where it begins.
That's
Yeah.
right.
That this whole thing
go
came
watch
together.
That movie. Once again, we put it up online.
Well, this is what I want to give folks. Let's direct folks to a bunch of different places they can get your materials.
Well, if you just go to James Twyman, TWYMAN.com, all of it's there, and you can watch the movie right there online.
Now, we only have about a minute left. Barnett had kind of alluded to this earlier. What's next in store for you? I mean, there's always something, because you're the guy that's always got...
It's interesting, because I seem to be going in a very different direction. Well, what at least appears to be a different direction. I have a beautiful retreat center outside of Ashland here. We are turning into a kind of hermitage.
Oh, interesting.
I have been just feeling a deep need for solitude and quiet, and I'm building a little cabin out here in the woods, and I'm going to be sitting there and just being in nature for a while, and not focus so much on doing, but focus more on being. And
being and quiet.
Before I do that,
solitude, and we're all, of course, going to come up and...
Barnett, we're on our way. Let us know.
You do, and you can. Hey, if you get here in a couple of hours, you can be here for Gene's party.
I'd love to. As I said, I regret that we're not able to be up there for Gene's party, but love to Gene and love to you, and thank you so much for being with us today. For any of our listeners that did not catch those details, you can also follow up on Jimmy's doings and beings on www.cuttingedgeconsciousness.com.
And stay with us, because Barnett and I will be right back after the break.